Now, this could be recency bias to the extreme, but I absolutely genuinely think that is the best race of Formula One that I have ever watched. And I've been watching Formula One solidly since 2010 for over 10 years, and then on and off for a couple of races in the mid 2000s. I'm sure in a couple of days, after a little bit of reflection, I may come down on that and it may fall into the top 3 or the top 5. But my god, we have just witnessed an exceptional Grand Prix. But hello and welcome to my driver rankings video for the Hungarian Grand Prix. We are just going to jump straight on into it and we are going to take a look at exactly where we leave in the championships heading into the 4-week summer break. It is Lewis Hamilton who regains the title lead by just 6 points heading into the summer. Lando Norris still holds his 3rd place spot over Valtteri Bottas, with Perez still 4 points behind him, with Sainz and Leclerc equal on 80 points. With most notably Nicholas Latifi and George Russell finally getting off the mark. Latifi scoring 4 points this weekend and Russell scoring 2, a double points finish for Williams, which means if we take a look at the Constructors' Championship, Williams are not last. They are 3rd last, and that is honestly absolutely monumental for a team like Williams. Mercedes have also retaken the lead in the Constructors' Championship by just 10 points, with 2 abysmal races from Red Bull, only scoring 4 points in 2 races. As remember, they scored 3 for the sprint race in Silverstone, and they scored just the 1 in Hungary. And now what we're going to do is take a look at the Audience Prediction Championships. Feel free to skip this section if you have not entered, but if you have, then we are going to take a look at those scores. And for the Hungarian Grand Prix, it is Archie who dominates this weekend. 16 out of a possible 25 points for honestly an extremely low scoring round. The median score was very, very low, one of the lowest we've had this year, with Chewbacca in 2nd and then Mickey 380SX joint on 13 with Object Maniac Lewis. Then have a bunch of other people scoring double points, and these are the people that bagged themselves their bonus statement, as 0 people predicted an Ocon victory and a Sebastian Vettel P2. A couple of people predicted Hamilton P3, and then lots of people predicted Sainz and Alonso in P4 and P5. But as you can see, myself is not on that leaderboard. I am in the second half of this leaderboard. I scored 5, joined with the Doctor Who channel, Elian, Hal as well. We're joint on 5, but at least I didn't come last, but that is just 2 abysmal races that I have had. Which means, adding up all of these points to the previous 10 races that we have had this season, we have an overall leaderboard that looks a little bit like this. Evan Darcy is still 10 points in front of Joe Bischoff. They both scored 10 at this weekend's Grand Prix. There is then 10 points again back to a Doctor Who channel and just 4 back to Danielle B, with Arturo Salazar getting past myself and Min Verstappen, and also Hal closing in fast. We then have a bunch of people that have joined the 100-point club. Those are Joshua Ritteraj, Gemma Gibson, and also Scott Hilland as well. We have a couple of people closing in, and those are Divot Rayhan, Minion023, Leroy also, and Mikey 380SX. And moving into the second half of the first leaderboard, we have people like VimZ25, Gear Down Aviation, QWERTY Uriop, Libra 777, Duali, Tushar Sign, and Elita M. Then, of course, there is a second half of the leaderboard, as we have over 100 individual entries into this contest, which is absolutely awesome. We have people like Ratchet, Harry Scott, Dan Claver, Josh H, Matty B393, Rubber Duck, WR, Sam Mollock, Jill Sheffy, and then scrolling this leaderboard down to the remaining entrants that we have had this season, we have people like Marza Spins, Matamoros, Adam Sturgeon, Esteban, Benny33, and then also Robert. But to make this championship fair for those who have not entered into every single round, I have worked out the average points that you would have scored for the entries that you have made. And that leaderboard looks a little bit like this. Schlank is still leading the way on 16 points out of a possible 25, with current championship leader Evan Darcy on 14.1. With 3 people joint on 14 and then a couple joint on 13.3. And you have to look in that second part of the leaderboard to find myself on 11.5 behind so many people. And then just scrolling down this leaderboard, we can take a look at the second half of leaderboard number 1. We have people like Carrie Slaughter on 10.9, Monkey Boy on 11 exactly, Kit BM on 10.1, and then a bunch of people joint on 10. With the second leaderboard for the average scores looking a bit like this, 9.9 for Alan, 9.7 for Boros Rabat as well, and then 8.3 for Mikey 380SX. With the second half of leaderboard number 2 looking a bit like this, we have people like Callum, Gear Down Aviation, Elian, Ricardo Kowota, Dan Claver, Sibi Ranganath, etc, etc. And with the audience predictions all done and dusted, we will now be taking a look at the overall driver rankings for this weekend's Hungarian Grand Prix. You guys, the audience, can get involved. Following the link in the top line of the description, you can submit your driver rankings for each of the drivers. 20 is the best possible score that they could have achieved, the absolute most flawless weekend from start to finish. Bear in mind qualifying, you can do that if you'd like, and then 1 is the worst possible score that each driver can possibly achieve. I myself in this video am going in 2020 Constructors' Championship order, so we start with the 2 Mercedes and we will end with the 2 Williams. And then on screen is Lewis Hamilton's score, 16 out of 20, an incredible comeback drive. Not only did he manage to put it on pole position by over 3/10 to his teammate and 4/10 clear of Red Bull, where they were exceptionally close all weekend, he then made a small mistake at the start. It was wet at the start of the Grand Prix on intermediate tyres, and then after the red flag period, which we'll get on into a little moment when we cover Valtteri Bottas, he stays out on the intermediate tyres for the restart, where everybody else comes in for the mediums, and then he has to pit doing one entire lap on those intermediate tyres, falls all the way to the back, and then fights his way back to 3rd spot. It was a comeback drive of his own making. It would have been a race where he'd have just pissed off into the distance, but definitely a comeback drive worth a lot. So 16 out of 20 is Lewis Hamilton's score overall, with Valtteri Bottas scoring 1. Oh, Valtteri Bottas, you would have scored a little bit more. Qualifying was decent on the front row, beating the 2 Red Bulls at arguably a Red Bull dominating track. But the race in the wet. This driver does not like racing in the wet. The last time we saw it, Turkey 2020, he spun about 6 bajillion million times. In this race, we saw him get the worst start just ever, bottled down all the way down to like P6 or something like that, fell behind Lando Norris, who was up to P3, battling with Max Verstappen, I believe it was, or Sergio Perez. One of the Red Bulls was alongside him. Then Valtteri Bottas just goes in way too deep, locks up, hits the back of Norris, Norris hits Verstappen, Bottas then hits Perez, calamities. Ultimately, his fault, stewards deemed it his fault, and he has a 5 grid drop for Spa, as well as 3 penalty points or something like that as well. So really not the best weekend for Valtteri Bottas whatsoever, and 1 out of 20 is his score for simply just being the cause of the main accident. And then we take a look at Max Verstappen, actually 14 out of 20. Now that is actually considerably high, but bear in mind, he was literally missing half a car. It was absolutely ridiculous the amount of damage. The floor damage alone would have cost him around half a second per lap, let alone the barge board damage that he sustained as well in that impact. The also side portion of the car on the side pod as well. I'm fairly sure they might have fixed that actually with just a small body panel change, but there was a significant amount of aero damage to Max Verstappen's car. And being able to somewhat fight and to not just fall back and just lose time and fight with people like Mick Schumacher, for example. The Red Bull was sort of ripped down to the Haas pace, and then also battle all the race with Daniel Ricciardo, who equally had damage of his own, and to get past for that last points paying position. It was a very, very strong drive considering the significant amount of damage on his car. So 14 out of 20 is Max Verstappen's score. However, Sergio Perez, I'm not ranking because he DNF'd through literally no fault of his own, and I would just feel bad giving him a middle ground of 10 or 5 or 15. So I've just decided not to score him because he DNF'd through no fault of his own. Daniel Ricciardo, for extremely similar reasons as Max Verstappen, gets 13 out of 20. a very, very good drive considering the level of damage that was on his car. He was involved in a separate incident isolated from the one caused by Valtteri Bottas. This one was caused by Lance Stroll, who we'll cover in just a little moment's time, and he spun, sustained nowhere near as much damage, or at least visual damage at least, as Max Verstappen, but definitely some aero performance on the floor and the bargeboard sections. And to come forward and to battle and to keep Max Verstappen behind for as long as he did, that's pretty good going, which is why he doesn't score 14 like Max, but he definitely needs some recognition for driving a completely damaged car around the Hungaroring. However, his teammate Lando Norris, again like Sergio Perez, I'm not going to give a score to because he retired extremely early on in the Grand Prix. So we will move from McLaren to Aston Martin, and Sebastian Vettel, 17 out of 20, his second Aston Martin podium, an absolutely phenomenal Grand Prix. I was so gutted that he couldn't get past Alpine all race. He tried so hard, but they were so close in race pace, and you need around 2 seconds per lap on the car in front to actually be able to put on an overtake. And maybe he was a couple of tenths to maximum half a second, 6/10, something like that per lap. His biggest shot came in the pit stop stage. However, Aston Martin slightly buckled. They ever so slightly buckled, and the stop was slow. It was about 3.3, when if it was 2.5, he'd have got the undercut, and then he would have had that clean air and the pace advantage to pull away from Ocon. It fell apart at the pit stop. So 17 out of 20 is Sebastian Vettel's score. However, Lance Stroll, 1 out of 20. Pretty much identical incidents, really, to Valtteri Bottas. Bad start, and then just outbroke himself. Cut across from the middle of the track in front of Sebastian Vettel, coincidentally, and then onto the grass, and then slid and smashed into Lando Norris, I believe it was. No, that was Valtteri Bottas. Valtteri Bottas hit Lando Norris. Lance Stroll hit Charles Leclerc on the inside. Then Leclerc hit Daniel Ricciardo, who spun. Leclerc instantly out. And again, Lance Stroll's fault. And he too, exactly the same as Valtteri Bottas, has a 5-place grid drop for Spa. So 1 out of 20 is Lance Stroll's score. And we will now move on in to Alpine. Fernando Alonso, 19 out of 20. So after all of the calamity of that opening lap where like 6 cars went out all at once, we had Alpine leading with Esteban Ocon. We then had Sebastian Vettel in P2, and then we had Alonso down in P6 or P5, and we were thinking, is he going to actually climb that leaderboard? He's the most experienced. He's in a quick car. Is he going to be able to take a victory? But not quite. However, his score gets bumped up because of his exceptional defensive driving of Lewis Hamilton as well. So setting the scene, we have Fernando Alonso, retired from Formula 1 and has been out for 2 years. Comes back and he's been slated as not being particularly great. So he is currently in the 7th fastest car as determined by my clean air lap algorithm. At best, it's probably the 6th fastest car overall, and he is competing with the current 7-time Formula 1 world champion in the 2nd fastest car on the grid, and he puts up a staunch defense of his position of, I think it was P5 at the time, in order to fend Lewis Hamilton's charge for that lead. If Hamilton had actually got past super quickly and super easily, he'd have caught the top 2 and he would have gone on to win that Grand Prix. But Alonso defending with all his worth for 5 or 6 laps was just stellar to watch. And without a doubt, Alonso was one of the key components to win that race for Alpine. So Alonso scores a whopping 19 out of 20. However, Esteban Ocon, the Grand Prix victor, gets 20 out of 20. If I gave Alonso 19 out of 20, I have to give Ocon 20 out of 20. His defense, the entire race of Sebastian Vettel was just superb. He did not put a foot wrong. He did not lock up in any way, shape or form. He did not go wide. He pitted when he needed to. His outlap was strong. Faultless. For a guy who hasn't won a single-seater race since 2015, in the 6th or 7th fastest car on the grid, defending from a 4-time Formula 1 world champion, brilliant stuff. We then take a look at the Ferraris, and again, Charles Leclerc retired through no fault of his own, so I'm not giving him a score. So we will take a look at Carlos Sainz, 15 out of 20. Honestly, I am a touch disappointed in Carlos Sainz. 15 out of 20 actually feels a little bit too high. He's in the Ferrari that is currently the 3rd/4th fastest car on the grid, and he couldn't close the gap to the top 2, who were in slower cars overall. So I'm a little bit confused at that, so I might bump this down to a 13. I'm thinking 13, maybe 14 or something like that. I was expecting a lot more from Carlos Sainz, and then he just didn't put up anywhere near as staunch a defence of Lewis Hamilton that Fernando Alonso managed to put up. So yeah, I'm a little bit disappointed in Carlos Sainz. But then taking a look at the AlphaTauri squad, Pierre Gasly, 13. A strange weekend. In a weekend where we see Esteban Ocon and Sebastian Vettel claiming P1 and P2, and we see Pierre Gasly, the previous driver to take advantage of a hectic race to take a Grand Prix victory, down in P7 or P8 or P6, wherever he was. It was strange. I thought the AlphaTauris, I was about to say Alpines, I thought the AlphaTauris would have actually done a little bit more. And then there was that team order switcheroo with Gasly on Yuki, Gasly getting past Yuki Tsunoda, and then Tsunoda getting back on the radio saying, tell Gasly to speed up, I've let him through, and he's not speeding up. A little bit of a confusing race, so 13 out of 20 is Pierre Gasly's score. Then his teammate Yuki Tsunoda also gets a 13. Now, he did finish behind by about 6 or 7 seconds, but him taking full advantage of that opening lap was absolutely stellar. He was running in P4 for such a long period of this race. Admittedly, he couldn't even get close to the Williams of Nicholas Latifi, who was running P3, by the way, which is just a story for a little bit later on. It was pretty decent from Yuki Tsunoda. Perhaps 14 out of 20 territory, but I'm going to stick with 13. Then we'll take a look at the Alfa Romeos, and Kimi Raikkonen gets a 10 out of 20. Once again, for a race as hectic as this one was, the Alfa Romeos didn't capitalise. However, unsafe release, and he did receive a 10-second time penalty. I think he dinked into Mazepin, I think in the calamity of the restart, the red flag restart where everyone came into the pits. So he did receive a 10-second time penalty, which would have lost him a lot of time. But it's just a strange weekend for Kimi Raikkonen. And then exactly the same story for Antonio Giovinazzi, although he sped in the pit lane and received a 10-second stop and go. That is just an instant slam dunk, whoop-de-doo, race is done. And again, no points for Antonio Giovinazzi. And then we'll take a look at the Haas drivers, and Mick Schumacher is up first, 16 out of 20. This was a race of his life, probably the race of his season so far. His defence of his position well outside of the points against Lewis Hamilton, against Max Verstappen, against Daniel Ricciardo. Admittedly, Max Verstappen and also Daniel Ricciardo had their damaged cars, but it brought them down to his car performance level, and it really showed how good of a driver Mick Schumacher actually is. If he's not in a shitbox of a car that's seconds, literal seconds, off of the pace of anybody else. In Britain, they were 2 seconds, 3 seconds off of the pace of the next non-Haas car. And in this race, where perhaps the Red Bull and the McLaren were a little bit slower than the Haas, or maybe on par, he was actually able to defend exceptionally well. So Mick Schumacher scores himself 16 out of 20. Nikita Mazepin scores nothing. He retired. He was dinked in the unsafe release with Kimi Raikkonen inside the pit lane, actually. So that is why Nikita Mazepin scores nothing. We will then take a look at the Williams pair. George Russell, 16 out of 20, and in tears in the interview rooms after scoring his first Williams points for 2.5 years. He finally has some points for Williams. That is absolutely mega. He did have to give back a lot of the positions. He was running in P2 at one point due to, I think he undertook a lot of people. I'm not exactly sure. I do need to see the replay of what exactly happened in the pit lane with George Russell. But he undertook a bunch of people in the pits, and then he had to give all those positions back. So he fell back to P8, whereas Latifi was still running up ahead of him. And then he was extremely selfless on the radio. He said, just just prioritize Nicky. If you have to hinder my race to prioritize Nicky to get the points, do that. I'm more than happy for you to do that. And that is absolutely the attitude that you need to have when you're trying to score points with a team like Williams. So 16 out of 20 is George Russell's score. An exceptional weekend. With Nicholas Latifi actually besting George Russell. Admittedly, it was through the luck of the turn 1 incidents and then the safety car or the red flag restart, but he scores 17 out of 20 to come home in P8. And bear in mind, he was running in P3 for such a long period of this race and was able to hold off the likes of Yuki Tsunoda behind him in a much faster car. That is exceptional. And there we go, there are all of my ranks for the Hungarian Grand Prix. That was just manic, and the race that F1 needed. This season is absolutely brilliant. The past few years of Formula 1 have actually been exceptional seasons. We have had some classic bangers of some races, and this one is easily the best race of this season. And probably, like I said at the start, one of the best races that I have ever seen. Now make sure to get involved using that link in the description down below to submit your driver rankings, remembering that 20 is the best possible score that you can give, and 1 is the worst possible score you can give. And that is all I've got for you today, guys. I hope you have enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next episode with whatever and whenever I decide to make it. I'll see you guys then.